He says that he's worked with and interviewed over 300 authors. Not a single one of them is 100% a pantser or 100% a plotter. And I think I need to be better about like making sure that I'm enjoying the process and making sure that I'm actually having fun doing it. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to another video. I'm spilling my coffee and the cat's running under my feet. I'm about to be late actually for how to plan your novel course. I need to get my computer on for anybody who's been following me for a little bit, and my computer's about to die, so I need to plug in too. For 4 hours today from 10 to 2, there is going to be the how to plan, all the different sections for how to plan your novels. So I need to join. There are 42 other people on. Let's go.
This is where I start. If you can summarize what your book is about before you start writing, it'll really help you write in a clear and distinct way. First novels come in at around 70 to 100 on the novel course, which is 15 weeks. Our suggested structure is that if you do you have any recommendations for finding your writing guessing that particular character? So I would say do this in days a week. And you just want to ask yourself, I'm interested in this stage of
All right, we are on a brief break. First session is over. Now I'm really excited. I think the one that I'm most excited for is the Plot Like a Pro, the 3 core elements of story structure with Alyssa Matesic. I don't know if I'm saying her name right. I actually follow her on YouTube. So when she popped up on here as like one of the people who was gonna do one of the sessions, I was like, I know her. So anyway, she's a developmental editor. That is kind of the editor who you would hire, who I would hire after you have the first draft. Well, probably not the first draft, probably like multiple drafts, but before you would actually query, and they can give you not necessarily line by line edits, but overarching kind of plot critiques, if you will.
They're the things that I discuss with my clients when I'm editing their manuscripts all the time. So if you nail these things, you're going to be in great shape when you go into draft and as you continue working through the revision and writing process. So what was the point of that? I'm not understanding how this is connecting to the main story. I'm not interested in the secondary character so much, and
all right, friends, we are officially starting the last session of the day. It is now 1 p.m. So from 1 to 2, it's a Q&A with just editors, which I think is so exciting because there's always so many questions flooded in at the end of every session. And they can never get to all of them because they only have like 10 or 15 minutes. So this will be a really interesting session. Also, I'm under the weather, so I apologize if this video is me, like, like if I'm not bringing any kind of energy, that's why. I'm very excited to see what kinds of things that they see in manuscripts when they're editing, and like things that they're, not even things that they're looking for specifically, because obviously that will be so different based on like the genre and that kind of thing, but I want to definitely avoid certain pitfalls.
We are live. Thank you everyone for joining us for our final session.
So the main question that I've kind of had on my mind for like during the last session with the authors was definitely like, how are they writing when you pick, especially when you're genre writing, like there was like a crime author on there, how are they writing plot points and like all the beats that a reader expects, so that they're getting the satisfaction out of the genre that they're reading, because obviously like they're reading a crime novel or a thriller or a romance or whatever for a reason. But how are you able to, how do you hit all those points but avoid tropey writing? How do you avoid predictability? I guess would be a word. I need to figure out how to word my question. I'm going to go ahead and start typing it in the thing, I think, because like I said, this whole session, there's already a question in there. We're only 2 minutes in, is all about the Q&A.
Has anyone ever tried to do that, where it's like any sort of hubristic editors like want to take a crack at The Hobbit and like sort of name check fantasy? How do you write all the expected plot beats for a specific genre without the writing becoming too tropey?
So expected plot beats. I like the unexpected in fiction. Obviously, we're talking genre, so there are tropes. So yeah, it's no good just me saying that, surprise me. I think if you read enough fantasy, if you're a fantasy fan and a fantasy writer, you already know the trope. For example, try and write a novel that was centered around a Mother of Dragons character now, because that said, if you're writing within tropes, make sure they're fun and have fun with them. So, like pulp, sword and sorcery I love it as a genre, but it is very tropey and it can be very cliche. But when it's done well, like the Red Sonja novels by Gail Simone or some of the more recent sort of revisiting of Robert E. Howard's work, it can be fun. But if it's tired and you see it all the time in your own reading, it might be harder to tackle in your writing, if you see what I mean. Try and do a twist on it, if that works.
A twist on the trope. I'm going to have to really metabolize all of my notes from today before I feel like I can dive back into my outline, because I want to redo it, obviously. That's like the whole point of taking this course. So I'm going to finish this last session. We have 30 minutes left for the day. There are a million questions in the chat, so I'm going to finish this out, maybe take a little bit of a break, and then come back to you when I feel like I've kind of gnawed on and processed all of this information.
A few minutes later.
Okay, friends, I think I have finally looked at all of my notes and feel like I can actually give some sort of slightly coherent little summary of my takeaways from today's classes. The first one with Tom Bromley, who is the one who hosts the How to Write a Novel course, which I have taken and do recommend, was 5 things to plan before you write. So things that you should know before you start doing anything, like any kind of work on your story. So he mentioned the elevator pitch. I have been told this by the few authors who I have been able to meet in person. This is something they talked about as well, is it's a good idea to be able to, you need to kind of know your story well enough, which is, it's difficult when you haven't written it yet, but you need to know your story well enough to be able to kind of in the moment tell somebody in one sentence. He said no more than 25 words, which is very hard to do. You should be able to summarize the overarching sort of narrative. This, he said, forces you to think about what the book is really about, because you obviously, 25 words is not a lot, so it's not even a long sentence. And I did this earlier with my one that I have that I've been calling an elevator pitch. Really, it's, I guess, too long to be considered one. The one that I had was 68 words, so it was a little bit lengthy. He also talks about pantsing versus plotting being kind of a forced argument. So Tom Bromley, who's got 25 years of experience, he says that he's worked with and interviewed over 300 authors, and not a single one of them is 100% a pantser or 100% a plotter. Everybody is on the spectrum somewhere. Don't even really think of yourself as a pantser or a plotter. It can be too restrictive. Just know that you're probably a little bit of both. You might be one more than the other. I'm definitely more of a plotter than a pantser, but it's nice to know it's okay when the story falls apart, or I'll use verbiage a lot of times oh, the story's off the rails or it's off the track, and it's but really that's because I'm discovering things as I'm actively writing. And those pantsing moments can be the most fun. That's good to know that he thinks it's a little bit restrictive. And I think he's right. And then another thing that's kind of outside of all that is the pacing. And when he said this, he immediately said, not the pacing of the story, because you obviously you're not going to get into the nitty-gritty stuff about pacing before you've even started writing. He said the pace that you want to go as the writer. If you have a goal in mind, you want to accomplish this, you want to finish this manuscript, within the next year, okay, there's going to be certain numbers that you're going to need to hit. Is it just you want to do it before you die and you maybe have decades to write? You need to have a very concrete, daily word count goal, or it doesn't even need to be daily, but like a regular one. So for me, doing the How to Write a Novel course made me realize 1,000 words is a little bit of a stretch for me. I think if you make it a little bit too lofty and then you don't hit it, you can feel really guilty about it unnecessarily. So make it realistic. And you know your own schedule. You're the only one who can kind of answer that for yourself. And then I think the next session, which was How to Plot Like a Pro, was probably my most favorite section. I think I have the most notes on that one. And I ended up writing out over here on this side. These are things that I specifically, as she was talking, was asking myself about my own story, and things that I've realized I either need to change a little bit or questions I need to ask myself. Number one, she talks about identifying your protagonist's objective, right? They all are going to have something that they want. And a lot of times she said, and generally this is how like a story structure will go, they always have a want in the beginning, but it will turn into a need, and a lot of time the need is different than the want. They thought they wanted something, and then once we get, halfway through the book or whatever, they realize, no, actually, I need this other thing. But you still have to have your North Star, that's what she calls it. You need to know what their goal is. Not necessarily from page 1, but very early on, so that the reader understands what the heck is going on. Then number 2, we need to establish the stakes, because the reader really won't care otherwise what's going on if there are no stakes. A good example of low stakes that I read recently, not to call out any particular book because but also I kind of love ranting about books sometimes. One that I thought I was going to love and is in the genre that I'm writing is An Academy for Liars. Thought I was gonna love this. It's right up my street. There's no reason why I shouldn't have loved it. And then I got to the end and I was like, actually, that was kind of boring. I couldn't exactly pinpoint right when I finished it what was bugging me about it. And then I watched Carrie Can Read. I watched her do a review on it. And she said she also didn't really enjoy it either. It's kind of maybe like a 3-star book. She mentioned it has very low stakes. If the girl, our main character, I don't even remember her name, if she like fails at this academy or whatever, she's not gonna die. There's not gonna be any really severe consequence. And so therefore, we kind of know as the reader that like it doesn't really matter if she wins or fails, if she's able to accomplish these things or not, because the stakes were so low. She would just like get kicked out of the school and like have to go back home, and that's like that's not high enough of stakes. So this is very important. She said she sees this a lot. The stakes are too low, and so the reader ends up not really caring too much about what happens. So you have to ask yourself, what is the protagonist going to gain and what will they lose if they fail? Okay, friends, it's been a little bit. I had to break for lunch. Number 3 was creating obstacles, obviously. Like, you have to have conflict. And so she talked about like internal versus external. So obviously we can get in our own ways a lot of times just as people. And so characters can get in their own way too. So that would be internal conflict. And then external obviously is if there's like literally something in their path, another person, something's going on in the real world that's kind of outside of their control. So make sure that you have obstacles. They should not be able to just get from point A to point B really easily, because that's boring for the reader. Basically, you're answering the question, how does my character react under pressure? So those were the main big 3 things that she talked about. And then she also mentioned, kind of like as an aside, to avoid unnecessary subplots. And this is actually very helpful for me, and something that kind of reiterates something I was already feeling. It slows the plot. And a lot of times, if it is not absolutely essential to the main plot, then it doesn't really need to be in there, and it will create that sort of soggy middle that people talk about, and you don't want to do that. You want to keep the momentum up, obviously. And this is something that I really notice pretty easily when I'm like watching a show on Netflix or reading a book or whatever, is whenever you're feeling like the pacing just completely fell out of the story and it's like not there at all, it's probably because we're focusing on like side characters who aren't as important and you want to get back to the main character, or there's some sort of subplot happening that's actually not as important. Yeah, it slows the pacing down because you're like, you just want to get back to the main thing, the main quest. So side quests I think are fun every now and then, but they sort of all have to circle back to the main quest. And then I didn't have any notes for parts 2 and 3, or for session 3 and 4, I didn't have any notes. But it was fun just to listen. So that the third session was listening to the 3 different authors talk about their process, basically, and how they plot. And they all do it very differently. One woman had like some Post-its on the wall behind her head, so it kind of reminded me of my little chapter summaries over there. And then some of them talked about how if you plot too much, it takes away the fun, because if you know what's going to happen, then it makes them like not even want to write the book at all. So they were all kind of, again, on a spectrum. Nobody fully plots the entire thing beat for beat, but then nobody really goes in completely not knowing anything at all. And it kind of helps knowing that seasoned authors, people who have been published multiple times, they have like 10 plus books published, they still will run into issues that they have to work through. They still will approach a book, their next book, as if they'd never written before. Like sometimes it feels like, they don't know what they're doing, even though it may be their 14th book. So that was really encouraging to hear as well. And then the 4th session was also very helpful. And that was just the Q&A. So it was literally just open to questions. There was a romance author/editor. There was I think the other woman was a developmental editor, and I think the man was as well. You could tell that they all had experience because they talked about their icks, things that, they see a lot that they don't like. So that was really interesting. It definitely solidified for me that I am going to reach out to a developmental editor when I am done with maybe, I don't know, draft 2 or 3. I'm not totally sure yet. I am for sure going to go in with a developmental editor first. One of the women, Amy, I think, was saying, don't get a line editor before a developmental editor, because you need the story to be, pretty solid before you go in and do any kind of line editing. Somebody else also asked a sort of like trope related question. So it was really interesting because I thought they were going to say like flat out, just don't write tropes. And they didn't. They basically said, there are certain plot beats that are expected in certain genres, so you want them to be there, but just kind of try to flip them on their head or make it more fun, or just do it a little bit differently. That was good to know, because I'm always afraid with when you're writing genre fiction that things can feel very predictable because you're kind of writing the same things that you've already seen in previous books. But as long as it's kind of unique to your own story, then it should feel fresh somewhat, and a little bit different. So that makes me feel good, because I was afraid they were going to say like, just don't write tropes at all, and then I was going to be very confused. But they didn't say that, so that's good. Ultimately, the whole day, like the whole course, was pretty encouraging, and I always find that to be the case, because it's so cool getting to see how published authors kind of think and the way that they answer questions. It's very much like, I don't know, you can tell they know their craft. It's encouraging to know like everybody's different. Everybody approaches everything differently. Sometimes an author would answer a question, or an editor would answer a question, and then immediately somebody would rebut and say, well, actually, I was going to say the opposite because this, and this. So it really just goes to show there's a million different ways to write. There's a million different editors out there who might love your writing, and then there's going to be people who really don't like it at all. Like in the future, when you go to query or go to submit, it's kind of like knowing that you have the freedom to do it however you want, basically, which is good. Ultimately, things need to be marketable, but the first draft should for sure just be fun, and I think I need to be better about like making sure that I'm enjoying the process and making sure that I'm actually having fun doing it. That was kind of the sentiment that the editors in that final session sort of left us with, was make sure you're enjoying the process, because if you're not enjoying it and you're not having any fun, it's not going to be any fun for the reader either. So I need to inject a little bit of fun back into it, and maybe stop being so strict with myself on the plotting aspect of it, and not get so in my way and bogged down with feeling like I have to plan every single scene out, and just kind of let the story flow. So I guess now it's time to write. I cannot be avoiding this any longer. I'm just gonna end up procrastinating if I wait any longer, so let's go. Also, look at my beautiful flowers. Aren't they so pretty? They're not for any reason other than to look at them.